Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's me, Rocco, again, bringing you guys another video, and I hope everyone's having a great holiday, just relaxing, enjoying time with the family, friends, and hopefully listening to a lot of great music. I know I am. And, this video here, it's long overdue, guys. I mean, I've been wanting to talk about this band for a long ass time, but then other bands just kept getting in the way. I got into Judas Priest recently, and I'm like, oh, crap, I keep putting off these Steely Dan videos. But today, we're finally going to be addressing one of my favorite bands of all time, Steely Dan. And that might come as a surprise because based on my channel, you're going to see a lot of progressive rock, a lot of heavy metal, a lot of hard rock, those kind of genres. And Steely Dan, they're kind of on the outskirts. I mean, they're from the 70s. They're classic. They have a lot of classic rock elements to it, but very heavy into the jazz, very heavy into the kind of pop sensibilities, which might be a little different from what I normally talk about. But let me tell you guys, I love it just as much as all that other music. Steely Dan is without a doubt one of my all-time favorite bands, and for a very long time they were actually my top 5 favorite bands of all time. Now they're like number 6 or number 7. Not that I like them any less, just more bands moved up in the rankings. But out of the like many bands I listen to be in the top 10 means you got to be a fantastic band. And Steely Dan is just amazing. I have so many fantastic memories listening to this band. Really bonding with my dad over this band, because that's how I got into them. The funny thing is, my dad now he's like the biggest Steely Dan fan I know. I mean, he comes home from work some nights, puts on like the entire Steely Dan discography from the 70s, which it's about 5 hours in runtime, 7 albums, about 5 hours, and he just lets it run. So many nights of the week, I'm just constantly exposed to Steely Dan, pretty much since 2010. So we're going on 10 years now, and I've never gotten bored of it. I mean, it's so fantastic. It's probably my most listened to band by extension because I'm always being exposed to it, and it just never fails to amaze me. It drives the rest of my family fucking crazy. Like my sister and my mom, they are so sick and tired of Steely Dan. It's ridiculous. But for me, I still love them this much. And I'll never forget back in the day when, back in 2010 or 2011, when my dad rediscovered Steely Dan. He'd always been a fan, but like he only knew like the radio hits, like "Do It Again," Ricky Don't Lose That Number. But then around that time, he rediscovered them, and we both got obsessed. For me, it took a little while to like warm up to them because again, they were just so different from all the other music I was listening to. I was listening to a lot of like Genesis and hard rock and progressive rock, and here comes this band out of nowhere from the States. Uh, you know, Basically a jazz fusion band, pretty much, and not in the sense of like crazy jazz instrumentals, but in the sense of like imperfectly fusing jazz with classic rock and even pop. I mean, so many of their songs have just amazing melodies, amazing hooks, and they're just infectious. And I just have great memories of getting into that. Again, at first it took me a while, but then once it sunk in, it really sunk in, and I've been a diehard fan ever since. Saw Steely Dan in 2017, sadly right after Walter Becker passed away. I'm sure, as we all know, Steely Dan, just a little bit of background information on them. They formed in the late 60s. Basically the whole time, their whole career, which lasted from not basically until 1980, and then they disbanded and they got back together again in like the mid 90s. But throughout their entire career, the songwriting team has always been Walter Becker and Donald Fagen. Those two were the masterminds behind the entire band. Early on, they were more of like they had more of a band kind of feel. I mean, they had a guitar player, Jeff Skunk Baxter, Denny Diaz also on guitar. They had a drummer, Jim Hodder, and they were kind of a pretty tight unit. They toured for the first 2 albums, but then at the end of the day, Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, they just fucking didn't want to tour anymore. Kind of like the Beatles at around like the Revolver time, and they just decided to go on as a duo, basically like just hiring session musicians along the way. So yeah, really unique history. But yeah, it's always been those two, and it was just disappointing that when I saw Steely Dan for the first time, Walter Becker passed away. He was no longer with us, and the band kind of continued with Donald Fagen, and of course all the session musicians or I guess touring musicians they hired. And it was a fantastic show. I mean, it was really emotional. I'll never forget that. I saw them at Casino Rama in Ontario, Canada, back in I think it was October 2017. So yeah, right after Walter Becker died, and they did like a whole tribute to him, and Donald Fagen looked pretty fucked up about it. It wasn't very cheerful. But then again, he probably isn't a very cheerful guy anyway, based on the Steely Dan lyrics. But we'll get into that after. But yeah, it was just a fantastic experience. Went with my dad, and it was just a perfect culmination of all those years of getting into Steely Dan. So I have nothing but love for this band. They've been with me my entire life, and again, I just love how unique they are. Just how they seamlessly blend jazz and pop hooks into their rock and rock, obviously, into their music, and just makes for like some of the most unique sounding shit I've ever heard in my life. Obviously, the quality of the music is fantastic. The instrumentation is near flawless, and I joke to my friends, we listen to all these metal bands like Metallica, Iron Maiden, and every song has a flashy, crazy eccentric guitar solo. But to this day, I still think that Steely Dan was the band with the most I don't know how to word this, the most high quality solos. I mean, so many of their songs just have jaw-droppingly amazing and memorable guitar solos that it's just ridiculous. I mean, every single note just seems to fit perfectly in place. If you listen to Peg, for example, from the Asia album, if you listen to that solo, honestly, if you take any one note out, it wouldn't be the same solo. I mean, it's just so meticulously crafted. And that goes for all the instruments, not just the guitar solos. The drumming, oh my god, guys. They got some of the best session drummers of all time. Bernard Purdie, Jeff Porcaro. They had the saxophone, obviously, keeping it with the jazz theme. They even had some orchestration on a lot of the songs, like, for example, Through with Buzz from Pretzel Logic. Just the instrumentation was just top-notch, guys. And the vocals, it's an acquired taste. Donald Fagen has this kind of... it's hard to describe this. He has like kind of like a creepy voice. I feel like he embodies like the perfect. He's the perfect embodiment of sleaze. Like his voice sounds so sleazy at times, but he does really shine. And once you do acquire the taste for his, I was gonna say his raspy vocals, but I don't know. It's really hard to describe Donald Fagen's vocals, but they're very very interesting. But once you acquire the taste, you'll never look back. I mean, he's just a fantastic singer, and the lyrics really make it too. I mean, the Steely Dan lyrics are some of the weirdest, some of the most incomprehensible things you can ever imagine. I mean, there's so many random references and jokes, and it's so hard to decipher, but I love it. It gives it this charm. And usually the lyrics talk about like kind of like the low life of American society, like the drug dealers and the fucking criminals and things like that, which gives their music like this sleazy feel, but again with the polished jazz and pop kind of music. It's really funny. It's a really funny contrast. But yeah, that's all part of the charm. I mean, the lyrics are just top notch for me, even though I don't understand half of them. Just the way the words sound and the way like the imagery that it evokes is just incredible. And another thing that we should talk about is the sound quality of Steely Dan. I mean, these guys were incredibly anal when it came to sound quality, and to this day, when people buy new sound systems, they often test it with Steely Dan albums, because that really tells you the quality of a sound system. I mean, if you put on a Steely Dan album and it doesn't sound like 100% amazing, you fucked up and you got the wrong you got a lower quality product right there. So that's just a testament to how like anally retentive they were. And yeah, I already mentioned the rotating cast of session musicians throughout like their later career, starting with their second album onward. They got some of the greatest talents and just made some of the best albums. So before we get into the list, that was the background information. I just want to mention that this list here, it's just going to be their classic albums. So 1972 to 1980, then they disbanded, and they joined in the 90s and made 2 new studio albums in the new millennium. Everything Must Go and Two Against Nature. Or the other way around. Two Against Nature came first. And I've heard Two Against Nature one time, and I didn't hate it, but, it just didn't have that same Steely Dan magic that I was used to from the past. And Everything Must Go I've never heard. I've only heard, like, negative things about it. So, I really stick with their 70s output. It's their best material anyway. So, this video is just going to have those albums. So, sorry if your favorite albums weren't... if your favorite albums are those 2000s ones, because they're not going to be on the list. I don't have enough experience with them at the moment, but they'd probably be at the bottom anyway. So I thought, what's the point? And yeah, basically what I did was to actually rank these albums. They're so Steely Dan is such a consistent band that there was no way I was going to subjectively rank these. Although it is my opinion, like it's all my personal preference. But what I did was I went systematically, looked at every single song, and ranked each song based on lyrics, vocals, instrumentation, creativity, replayability, and an overall score. And if you want to check out the details of my rating system, go back to my Genesis ranked video. Near the beginning, I kind of explain how it's done. But basically, I use the same rating system from that video to make this video. So if you guys want to go back and see how nerdy I am, then check that out. But yeah, the point is, all these albums are just so close in quality, so consistent, that even number 7 is almost a fucking masterpiece. So if your favorite album is near the bottom, don't you worry, guys. These albums are so close in quality that you could switch the order. But at the moment, these are going to be my top 7 Steely Dan albums. So without further ado, let's dive right in, because this intro is getting way too long already. And I hope you guys enjoy it. So let's do it. Alright guys, here we are at the bottom of the list. Coming in at number 7, we got Katie Lied from 1974. Don't crucify me, guys. I know a lot of you guys love this album. It's highly regarded by a lot of fans. But again, remember, this album's awesome. It just falls at the bottom because I like the other albums more. I still consider this a fantastic album. And yeah, this one here, I mean, what's there to say about it? Obviously, it's a great album, has a lot of strong songs on it, and it really continues the same kind of themes they were going with on Pretzel Logic. Very short, sweet, to the point songs, 3-4 minutes. Again, a lot of jazz, even more so than Pretzel Logic. I think they really started bringing in a lot more of their jazz influence to the songs, and rock kind of took a step back a little bit into the background. Jazz is really the main genre on this one. And yeah, the songwriting's fantastic. Some really catchy hooks, really catchy choruses. And again, just keeping with the same theme as Pretzel Logic. Again, at this point, the band just consisted of Becker and Fagan and just a revolving cast of amazing session musicians. I don't think any of the original members really played on this album. I think Pretzel Logic was the last one where Jeff Skunk Baxter and Jim Hodder and Elliot Randall, basically all their older band members were featured on. But yeah, Katie Lied was just basically all session musicians. And yeah, a fantastic album. The reason it's at the bottom, there's a few songs I'm not too big on this album. Everyone's Gone to the Movies. I don't get any pleasure from that song anymore. It has this Caribbean kind of feel to it, and the chorus is just so sickly sweet, and the lyrics are kind of, they're kind of weird. They're about this porno theater owner, Mr. LePage or some shit like that. I don't know. You can't even dream this stuff up, guys. Steely Dan lyrics are just totally incomprehensible. And yeah, it's just, I don't know. For me, it's just a boring song. There's a few other ones that are kind of plotting and, don't really speak much to me. Mostly Chain Lightning and Daddy Don't Live in That New York City No More. Although I do like that song a lot. Chain Lightning's kind of, I feel like it could be on the background at the shopping mall or something. Just really nothing creative about that track. But let's stop talking about the negative shit. Those are the only songs where I'm a little iffy on. But there are so many strong tracks on this album, just top to bottom. Black Friday, one of the greatest guitar Steely Dan tunes I've ever heard. Great bluesy track. Then you got Bad Sneakers and Rose Darling, bringing in the big pop choruses and the catchy hooks. Doctor Wu, my favorite track on the album. This song is just incredible. One of the greatest kind of pure jazz Steely Dan songs. Amazing saxophone playing. It's one of my personal favorites. I'd put this in my top 10 Steely Dan songs any goddamn day. It's just never gets old. And it's also kind of the title track of the album, because they mention the line Katie Lied on the song. And it just has this whole mystique about it. Again, I have no idea what the fuck it's about, but I don't know. There's just some mystique and an atmosphere to this song that's it just stands out on the album as being by far the greatest song. But then later on in the album, you got a lot of deep tracks that I love. Your Gold Teeth Part 2, fantastic track. Any World That I'm Welcome To, just fantastic lyrics. And throw back the Little Ones, the last song. It has this great swing kind of, horn section that comes in later on the song. It totally elevates it. I think one of the most underrated Steely Dan songs. So yes, just so many great tunes on this one. And for as far as my rating system goes, I give this album an 82.29%. So again, it's cracked the 80s. Anything above an 80 is excellent. Anything above an 85 is a masterpiece on my rating system. So yeah, it's a pretty critical system. So to get a score of 82, it's got to be great. Yeah, that's Katie Lied. I love it. Love the album cover with the praying mantis. And just great album. Just happens to be my least favorite. So moving on. All right, guys, number 6. We got the final album from Steely Dan's classic run, 1980's Gaucho. And you know what, guys? If you had asked me this a couple years back, this would have been on the bottom spot. But since then, it's actually grown on me a lot more. And this album here, there's just some charm. There's just a charm to it that a lot of the other Steely Dan albums don't have. There's like a different atmosphere on it, and I just love it. It just keeps growing and growing on me. It's probably the underdog. A lot of fans probably consider this the worst of the Steely Dan albums, but I freaking love it. I consider it. It's almost a masterpiece, honestly. And what's there to say about this album? It's just a really weird and interesting one. The last album before this, Asia, was from '77, so there was a big 3-year gap. And you'd probably be thinking, okay, maybe Steely Dan went on a little hiatus, maybe a few tours got in the way. But no, man, like they were recording this album for 2 fucking years. I'm telling you guys, these guys were some of the most anally retentive audiophiles of all time. Everything had to be right. They would do a million fucking takes of every song, driving all the session musicians crazy. And these guys must have been a nightmare to work with. But Gaucho, it's honestly, it's considered one of the most flawlessly recorded albums of all time in terms of like sonic quality. And I'm no audiophile, so like I don't give a shit about that. I just care about the songwriting and the songs. But I'm sure if you're an audiophile, this album's gonna really really do a lot for you, because it's just crystal clear. Some people criticize it for that. Some people say it sounds like too sterile. And I can kind of see where they're coming from, but for me it's all about the songwriting, and this album has some fantastic songs. I mean, Babylon Sisters, the opening track. Just that iconic intro, just incredible. And again, it has this atmosphere about it, kind of like leaving the outskirts of town. Who knows if it was a criminal in the song, fleeing from the scene. I don't know. I don't know about the lyrics, but it's a great track. Just has this great laid back atmosphere opening up the album, and really takes its time to develop. And also, I love the female backup singers on this song. Just give it this amazing sleazy kind of swing to it. There's so many classics. I mean, the deep tracks on the album really does it for me. Third World Man, the last song on the album, it's just this slow, plodding, nightmarish kind of tune. But again, one of the most uplifting choruses. Just great. A great vocal performance by Fagan, by the way. And then you got songs like Time Out of Mind, Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits playing the guitar on this tune. Just fantastic. You got the track Gaucho, the title track. Again, some fantastic backup vocals, a really strong chorus. The hit song Hey 19, which I've heard a few too many times at this point. It's kind of wearing a little thin on me, but I do realize it's a great song. Again, some great atmosphere. Great low life character, like a lot of Steely Dan songs. Just an old dude hitting on a chick at a bar. Trying to get that young meat, if you know what I mean. But yeah, some cool. And then Glamour Profession. One of the sleaziest songs I ever heard. I think it's about a drug dealer, a rich drug lord or something. And the last few minutes of that song had this amazing fade out guitar solo. One of the best Steely Dan moments. And yeah, just some great songs. And although people do say it's like a little bit sterile, doesn't have any heart and soul, I think the songwriting is still there, and that should be the most important thing. Speaking about the music, it does differ a lot from Asia. We're still deep into Steely Dan's like just pure jazz years. This one's more adult contemporary, more than just straight up jazz. And there's a lot less interesting musical sections on this album compared to Asia. I mean, Asia just had a lot of amazing showcases. We got some drum solos, sax solos, amazing guitar solos. On this album, the instrumentation kind of supports the song more than accelerates it or amplifies the quality of the song. Whereas on Asia, you really did get those showcases. This album's just a little more succinct, a little bit more poppy, a little bit more commercial than Asia, I would say. But overall, it's still fantastic. Even though you don't get those like explosive guitar solos and those incredible jazz showcases. It's just great. Uh, Another criticism I have of it, just briefly, is that it does use drum machine on a few tracks. Apparently, it was the first album to use drum machine or something crazy like that. But yeah, just obviously, I'm not a fan of drum machine. I prefer just regular drumming, I guess. But overall, it doesn't impact the album that much. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about Gaucho. I give it a strong score of 84.39%, so very high. Favorite track, probably Babylon Sisters, but Third World Man, Gaucho, and Time Out of Mind are really close seconds. My least favorite is probably My Rival. Nothing wrong with it, just not one of my favorite tunes. So yeah, that's Gaucho. Now we're gonna be moving on to number 5. All right, guys, taking the 5th spot, we got another fan favorite, 1974's Pretzel Logic. This album here, guys, is just, it's regarded by many as being one of the absolute best Steely Dan albums. And honestly, I can't argue with that. Just for me, myself personally, I love the albums that have a lot more expansive instrumentation, those like long jazz jams and showcases I was talking about in the last section. This album here is the most stripped back, condensed, brief, to the point, and poppy Steely Dan album that there is. And it's a masterclass. I mean, this album here, they just pack so many interesting creative ideas into a 33-minute runtime. None of the songs really exceed like 3-4 minutes. Like, I think 4 minutes is like the absolute maximum these songs last for. And it's just such a fantastic collection of songs and definitely like a masterpiece. This album here is just, again, it's just a masterclass of how to write succinct pop tunes. And again, there's lots of jazz peppered throughout, but I wouldn't say jazz is like the main influence on the album. On the last album, interestingly enough, Countdown to Ecstasy, I consider that album a lot jazzier than this one. But then again, after Kitty Lie, they would revert back to full blown jazz. So Pretzel Logic was kind of like a weird kind of transitional album. And I think the reason why was because Countdown to Ecstasy didn't do too well in the charts, and the band felt like they really had to like strip down their sound, go back to more of the pop hooks of their debut album, and they totally succeeded with Pretzel Logic. I mean, so many just amazing songs, and I love the lyrics on this album. I mean, all the lyrics describe these crazy like characters and scenarios that only Steely Dan could come up with. For example, one of my favorite tracks on the album, Charlie Freak. It's about this homeless man who basically he gets tricked into selling his gold ring for chicken feed because he's starving. So again, a lot of social commentary, a lot of interesting characters and lyrics like that. Even things like Barrytown, describing these like fictional places, kind of gives you like a nostalgia, and like you haven't even been there before, and you still get a sense of this nostalgia. There's like a jazz instrumental, the St. Louis, East St. Louis Toodaloo, which is a Duke Ellington cover or something like that. That's really cool. Just throw that in there. And my favorite track on the album, the absolutely bluesy Pretzel Logic, with one of the best, freaking love the guitar solo on that track. Again, with Steely Dan, so many amazing guitar solos. Night by Night, just the swing to that song is just, incredible. And then any major dude will tell you some of the most heartfelt Steely Dan lyrics I've ever heard. Just love the chorus on that song. One of the most underrated. There's just so many good songs on this album, just top to bottom. The only one I say I wouldn't be a fan of is, that I'm not a fan of, I should say, is, I can't even think of one. They're all so good. Probably the last song, Monkey in Your Soul. It's just not, it stands out as being like one of like the more filler kind of tunes. But other than that, it's just an incredible album. And I'm going to give this one a score of 86.53. So this is the first one to crack that magical 85 mark. So yeah, Pretzel Logic, I understand why it's a fan favorite. Just for me personally, there's a few albums that have a bit more sophisticated instrumentation that just speaks to me more. And you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, guys, coming in at number 4, we got the album that started it all. 1972's Can't Buy a Thrill. And guys, let me tell you, for the longest time, I would have this album at number 1. I mean, this album was my longtime favorite Steely Dan album. And it wasn't until recent years, like maybe 1 or 2 years ago, where other albums kind of surpassed it and, leaving it at number 4. But, that's not to say I don't like the album. On the contrary, I think this is a masterpiece. It's a fantastic album. Some of the best songs from the classic rock period, and the most unique Steely Dan album. This one here, coming in early in their career, it wasn't like full-fledged jazz rock at this point. I mean, it does have the jazz sprinkled throughout, but it's more subdued and nowhere near as prevalent as on later albums. Instead, we got a really good guitar-driven, classic rock kind of album with a lot of influences. I mean, there's even some Latin vibes going on here. There's some great piano playing by Donald Fagen. Just a great album. And, at this point, Steely Dan were really a band. Sure, you had Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, being the masterminds behind everything. But, like, they had a designated guitar player. They had a designated drummer. And, interestingly enough, they hired a second lead singer, David Palmer, because Donald Fagen had trouble singing live. He had stage fright or something like that. And they hired him on as like a second singer. And he sings a few more of like the more laid back songs on the album, which are, my least favorites. Well, we'll get into that later. And even Jim Hodder, the drummer, he sings on Midnight Cruiser. And although he may not technically be a great singer, his voice just perfectly suits that track. So yeah, this is a pretty unique Steely Dan album in the sense that Donald Fagen isn't singing like all the songs basically. And it has a unique flavor. It's a much brighter album, a much sunnier album, less cynical, less depressing than a lot of the other Steely Dan albums. And the lyrics aren't that impenetrable. I mean, someone can get a firm grasp on like what these songs are about. Do It Again, it's about a gambler. Dirty Work, obviously about, cheating and infidelity. It's a lot more straightforward. So in that sense, it's kind of the most of its times Steely Dan album. All the other ones kind of went against the grain and did their own thing. But yeah, and it's a really good guitar-driven album. I mean, there's so many fantastic solos. We all know Reelin' in the Years, the solo on that song is just beyond incredible. One of the Jimmy Page from Zeppelin himself, he said himself that that's probably one of his favorite solos. And the sitar kind of sounding solo and Do It Again, that's another big highlight. I mean, a very strong guitar-driven album. The only weak points, again, are the songs that are sung by David Palmer, like Dirty Work. I mean, it's a good song for what it is, but I think over time, I got a little bored of listening to it over and over again. And it doesn't really have much to offer other than the chorus, which kind of gets repetitive. And then you got Brooklyn Owes the Charmer Over Me. Just kind of a generic song, to be honest. I mean, it's nice, but it doesn't really have that Steely Dan feel to it. But other than that, there's so many classics. I mean, it goes without saying, Do It Again, Reelin' in the Years, they're classics. I've heard these songs on the radio many times back in the day, well before I got into Steely Dan, and always enjoyed them. Then you got things like Kings, very jazzy. Midnight Cruiser, one of the most emotional Steely Dan songs for me. Only a Fool Would Say That Again, bringing in that jazz lounge kind of feel. Fire in the Hole, some great piano playing. Turn That Heartbeat Over Again, great closing track. And again, just a very classic rock-driven Steely Dan album. That was, I guess, my favorite for the longest time because I was more into classic rock, and I wasn't really ready for the jazz, assault of their later albums. But yeah, it's still one of my favorites. I'm going to give this one an 86.79%. So, it's a masterpiece. It's still one I come back to over and over again. And the songwriting is just as strong as ever. One of the best debut albums. I mean, there is nothing on this album that sounds like an amateur band. It sounds like these guys have been in the studio for years and years and years because it's just so polished and so professional sounding. But yeah, there was a lot more changes to come and a lot better albums coming up. All right, guys, now we get into the top three. And these albums here, I kind of consider the holy trinity of Steely Dan. There's a significant jump in score from Can't Buy a Thrill to this album right here. And these next three albums are just mind-blowing masterpieces. I will never get bored of these albums. They're just classics. Just some of the best songwriting I've ever heard in my life. Some of the best instrumental passages I've ever heard in my life. And yeah, so can't say enough about these. They're just stone cold masterpieces. Right up there with like the best of progressive rock, the best metal albums. And they're always going to hold a special place for me. So kicking off the list of the top three, we got Countdown to Ecstasy, their second album. This one's from 1973. And this marked a major turning point in Steely Dan. They were still kind of a unit, they hadn't moved on to the session musician period yet. They still had, their guitar player and their designated members basically, and they were still touring. But this album really was a huge step up from Can't Buy a Thrill. And I wouldn't have said that a few years ago, but now I finally realize it really is. I mean, it's not as immediate, it's not as catchy as Can't Buy a Thrill. It's a lot darker, it's a lot jazzier, but more importantly, the instrumentation on this album is just incredible. I mean, they really take their time to develop the instrumental jams on this, just bringing in some of their heaviest music up to this point. The cynical lyrics start kicking in, and again, combining that with the jazz, it just makes for such a classic album. There's a lot of influences on this album. Starting off with Bodhisattva, just a rip-roaring opening track, has that like good old-fashioned rock and roll kind of influence, but also mixed with jazz, and some of the craziest guitar work I've ever heard in my life. Just an incredible song. And when I saw this live, it was just, they really took it to the next level with the guitar solos. I mean, the instrumentation on this one is just beyond amazing. And then you got things like Your Gold Teeth. I already mentioned Your Gold Teeth Part 2, which was on Katie Lied. But the original song is a lot darker, a lot jazzier, and goes into this long, extended jazz instrumental, which I just freaking love. It has the coolest vibe to it. Same goes for Showbiz Kids. This one here is a lot bluesier and a lot heavier, with the guitar just ripping throughout the entire song. Like this Jeff Skunk Baxter's guitar playing on this track, just legendary. Some of the most intense playing on any Steely Dan song. Boston Rag, used to be my favorite song on the album. It's since been replaced by King of the World, but Boston Rag is just fantastic. Again, a great breakdown, a great guitar solo. King of the World's my favorite. It has this, it has a lot of synthesizers, so a lot of that progressive rock feel, but the chorus just kills me every single time, and has a really cool funky intro. There's just so much to say about this album. It's so little time, but yeah, it's a definite masterpiece. My least favorite song on the album is probably Pearl of the Corridor. Again, it's just another kind of laid-back, standard ballad kind of tune. Has kind of a loungy kind of feel to it, but it's okay. It's not bad. And Razor Boy's a classic song as well. Forgot to mention that one. And, My Old School, which was supposed to be the hit from the album. I've heard it a few times on the radio, but it doesn't seem to be, as well recognized as Reelin' in the Years and Do It Again from their previous album. But yeah, I guess it was the strongest single from the album. That's another thing. This album didn't do very well in the charts, probably because it's a lot darker, a lot jazzier, a lot of long instrumental passages, which I guess a lot of mainstream fans at the time weren't ready for compared to Can't Buy a Thrill. So it didn't do well, and I guess that inspired them to take a step back with Pretzel Logic, as I already mentioned, write more short, compact, to the point songs. But yeah, I really think Countdown to Ecstasy was a major step up from Can't Buy a Thrill, and just a really strong step forward to more dark and cynical and musically complex music. So yeah, Countdown to Ecstasy, I give this one a 90.65%. So yeah, we're in the 90s now, guys. This is like upper echelon of music. And yeah, Countdown to Ecstasy definitely belongs up there. So if you're not into it now, give it a few more listens, and you will be. I promise. Alright, guys, coming in at number 2, The Royal Scam from 1976. Guys, I can't even describe how much I love this album. It's such a great album. I mean, this is Steely Dan at their heaviest. This is Steely Dan at their funkiest as well, and just has some of the greatest guitar solos I've ever heard in my life. I mean, opening up the album, Kid Charlemagne comes in, just one of their best songs. The first 3 songs on this album just punch you in the face one after the other. They're all stone cold classics. Kid Charlemagne's the funky one. Fantastic guitar solo, great lyrics about synthesizing drugs and all that stuff. It speaks to me. Kings of Altamira, the second track. This is the jazzy, this is the saxophone, catchy chorus, pop hook, extravaganza. Then you got then you got Don't Take Me Alive, just one of the heaviest, most kick-ass Steely Dan tracks of all time. Opens up with just one of the best guitar solos I ever heard in my life, and one of the best intros ever. And then the album takes a funkier turn with the fez and green earrings, and goes down south to the Caribbean with Haitian divorce, the hilarious lyrics, finishing off with I used to think it was repetitive, but the classic epic song, The Royal Scam. Some of the best piano playing I ever heard. Fucking top to bottom, there's not much more to say about it. It's just one of their best albums. And this is the one right after Katie Lied, and it's, for me, it's just a huge step up from Katie Lied. And as I mentioned, I do like that album a lot, but this one here, there's no comparison. It's just, they were firing on all cylinders. Again, they're deep into their session musician period, so they really had the cream of the crop to pick from. I gotta mention Larry Carlton's guitar playing on a lot of these songs. Kid Charlemagne, for example, one of the best guitar solos, just so memorable. I can literally sing this whole album like from start to finish, note for note. I'm not gonna do that, obviously, but I could if I wanted to. It's just so strong from top to bottom. And yeah, it's a lot. I kind of consider this one in the number one position, kind of like brother and sister albums. This one's the funkier, the sleazier one, and the next one's the darker and more, the more sonically perfect one. Has a little bit more complexity to it. This one here is more fun and, has that nice groove to it. It's the grooviest album. And yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about the Royal Scam. It gets a 90.87. So, just slightly, pretty much the same score as Countdown to Ecstasy, just slightly higher. It would have been even higher if not for the song. Oh no, I'm thinking of a different album. Forget about it. Every song on this album's great. I was thinking of something else. Just scratch that thought. Favorite track on the album? Probably, it's tough. Probably Kid Charlemagne, but Don't Take Me Alive and the title track are right up there. Green Earrings, overall as a song, it's not one of my favorite tracks on the album, but it has one of the best instrumental passages on the entire album. I mean, that middle section, just, I'm dead. I'm fucking dead after I hear that. It's incredible. So yeah, go listen to it right now. I love the album cover as well, although the band hates it. I just love, how sinister it looks. And yeah, that's all I gotta say about the Royal Scam. And now we're finally going to be moving on to number one, which I'm sure is no surprise. Alright guys, I hate to be this predictable, but coming in at number one, it's gotta be Asia from 1977. I know what you're thinking, like, holy shit, it's the most cliche choice, but you know what, most people I'd say do consider this their best album, and I'm in that camp as well. I mean, it's just perfect. I mean, it's a perfect album. I used to think Can't Buy Thrill was my favorite Steely Dan album for a long time, but now I can't relate to that anymore. Now it's got to be Asia all the way. I mean, this album here is just, it's musical perfection. Not just the sound quality, but like the musicianship itself. You can't beat this album. I mean, the drumming itself. Bernard Purdie's shuffle, just incredible. And the drumming on the title track, Asia, is one of the greatest drum showcases of all time. I believe that was Steve Gadd playing the drums on that track. Hopefully I'm not wrong, but yeah, I believe it's Steve Gadd, and it's just one of the best drumming performances I ever heard in my life. The saxophone playing is fantastic. The lyrics are fantastic. It's by far their jazziest album, and I think this is really a culmination of what Steely Dan were really trying to do, just achieve just musical perfection. And they couldn't replicate it with Gaucho. They knew they couldn't replicate it, so I think that's why they went in a more commercial, more adult contemporary direction, because they really did all they could possibly do with jazz on this album. And again, just top to bottom, any of these songs could be in a top 10 list of Steely Dan tracks. I mean, Black Cow, just the moody intro of the album, the title track Asia, it's such a warm song, such a great saxophone playing on there. Deacon Blues, one of my personal favorite Steely Dan tracks, one of the best lyrical statements Donald Fagen has ever made. Peg, you got the catchy, short, sweet pop tune of the album. So they had an abandoned pop. You still got the catchy tunes like Peg. Home at Last, for me, one of the most epic, and probably the best guitar solo on the album. Just incredible. And then I Got the News, just a quick, upbeat, quirky jazz tune. Love it. Love the fade out of that track. And then Josie, one of the best intros. And again, evolving into one of the funkier tracks, which could have easily been on the Royal Scam. So yeah, top to bottom, it's a flawless masterpiece. I give this one a 92.92%. So hell yeah, it's way up there. And yeah, just a phenomenal album. So that's pretty much all I got to say about it. It's like a desert island album for me. I love the album cover, the darkness, and then that that slit down the middle with the face. It's such a moody one. And yeah, probably probably most people's favorite album by Steely Dan. So yeah, that rounds out the list. Thanks so much for watching, guys. As always, comment below. Put your list down in the comments. I would love to see different people's opinions. I have a feeling this one's probably going to be number one for most people, followed by probably like Pretzel Logic or KD Lied or one of those albums. But yeah, for me, Asia's always going to be number one. So thanks again for watching, guys, and stay tuned for more music videos coming your way.